Have you ever experienced a God moment? By that, I'm not speaking of an audible voice from heaven or some mysterious otherworldly experience, but a moment when you just knew that you knew that you knew God had dropped something into your heart. It might have been when you were listening to a worship song or singing a worship song, or perhaps it happened when you had an open Bible on your lap, reflecting on a passage in silence, and the words that you read were not merely words of some ancient story, but they became truly the Word of God in a fresh and dynamic way. They breathed out life and inspiration. There are endless ways that God can choose to speak to us, and He's very creative in that regard. Well, some 30 years ago, Julie and I had not been at Tamworth Elim Church very long and really wanted to know what the next step or steps were for the church. We believed that God had called us here and called us for a reason. But I did need to hear what step or steps the Lord required us to take. Well, one afternoon, I was in my office, part praying, part daydreaming, when a phrase came to mind. What is in your hand? Well, it took a moment or two for me to capture my thoughts. I reminded myself that those 5 words are found in Exodus chapter 4, when God appeared to Moses in a burning bush. The Lord had a special task for Moses to perform, but Moses was having none of it, and I'm sure you know the passage very well. However, at that moment, I sensed that these words that came to mind, what is in your hand, were more significant than just a cool idea for my next sermon. I sensed that the Lord might be saying something quite important in terms of direction, something that I needed to pray through and share with others in order to discern what the Lord's voice was saying to us. I'll come back to that. But first, let's try to understand the context of those words in an attempt to understand what's happening. And please bear with me for a few minutes as we do a scenic detour into the background. Well, the first book of the Bible, Genesis, closes with Joseph as Prime Minister of Egypt, second in authority to Pharaoh. He was a man blessed by God, a man of spiritual discernment and great wisdom, a national hero who saved the nation of Israel from starvation in the 7 years of famine. During this time, Joseph's estranged family left Canaan and moved to live in Egypt, as they had heard there was food to purchase. In the book of Genesis, we read of their reconciliation to Joseph, and they all lived the rest of their days in Egypt in comfort and luxury. It's a happily ever after story. Well, fast forward 430 years. Joseph's descendants were still living in Egypt, but lots of things had changed. In Joseph's day, there were 70 descendants in all. But over 430 years later, the 70 became around about 600,000. No televisions in those days. The writer of Exodus says that Joseph's descendants were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Then we read in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power. Just catch that phrase. That's an important phrase. Who did not know about Joseph. In other words, the debt that the nation of Egypt owed to Joseph was something that was long forgotten. And as I read those verses again this week, I couldn't help but think of our own nation, that we're a nation that has been built on Christian foundations. It has a heritage going back many, many centuries. The laws of our land, the political system, education, social welfare, prison reform, medical and hospice care, all had their roots in the Christian faith. It is Christian believers who have put the great into Great Britain. People like Elizabeth Fry and her prison reforms. Men like George Muller and his orphanages, caring for over 10,000 children, establishing 117 schools in a time when there was no help or education available for such children. They were left to scavenge. William Wilberforce, leader of the movement to abolish slavery in the UK and the Commonwealth. Lord Shaftesbury campaigned for better working conditions, reforms to lunacy laws, education and the limitation of child labour. Thomas Bernardo, founder of Homes for the Poor and Deprived. In more recent times, people like Dame Cicely Saunders, who started the hospice movement. And all these people were driven by their Christian faith, and their service to our country is immeasurable. Maybe some of those names are not known to you. You could say in some circles their legacy has long since been forgotten. Men and women to whom we owe a great debt. Exodus 1:8. Then a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. The new king was unaware of Joseph, and because he did not know of Joseph's legacy, he had little problem in persecuting Joseph's descendants, the Israelites. In some respects, they were easy targets. They were outsiders, strangers in the land. They were not part of the indigenous peoples. They were different. They were looked upon with suspicion. They were feared. And as we read on, we read that the people of Israel groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of slavery went up to God. We read in the next few verses in Exodus chapter 2 that God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. This takes us into chapter 3. We're nearly there. And the story of God calling Moses to be his man, the one who would lead the Israelites out of Egypt. We read of that amazing encounter that Moses had with God, who spoke to him through a bush which was ablaze, yet not consumed with fire. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Notice those words there. I have seen, I have heard, I am concerned, I have come down to rescue, I will bring them out of the land. And I can only guess that Moses, upon hearing these words, was ecstatic, exhilarated. He himself had tried to bring justice to his people, which had ended badly in his needing to run away. Remember the occasion when he killed the Egyptian soldier for mistreating a Hebrew. Well, these words of God's rescue must have been music to his ears. At last, he said to himself, God has seen their misery and is going to do something about it. The Lord continues in Exodus chapter 3, verse 9 and 10. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are pressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Hello? Excuse me? I thought you said that you had come down to rescue them. And God says, that's right, I will. And I'm going to achieve that end through you, Moses. Well, can you just imagine that moment? There's an important lesson in that verse. God's work is done and societal change is brought about, and God's kingdom extended through ordinary folk like you and me, who love God and love others, through those who have passion for God and compassion for people. What follows next is a passage which is a favourite for many preachers, where Moses offers all his reasons. No, not his reasons, his excuses of why he cannot do what God is calling him to do. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? What shall I tell the Israelites? What if they do not believe in me or listen to me? And what if they say that the Lord did not appear to you? Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." And then he said, "Please send someone else." Well, the Lord shows such remarkable patience and answers every question Moses offers. That was until Moses asked the Lord to send someone else. The Lord is calling Moses to be his man. And Moses, through fear and a deep sense of inadequacy, is resisting God. Then the Lord asks Moses, "What is in your hand?" That's the end of the detour, by the way. I got there in the end. What is in your hand? What's in my hand? Nothing, not really. It's a staff. It's just an old stick. And then God shows Moses what he can do with an old stick. Then the Lord told Moses to throw that staff to the ground, and it became a snake. And then at God's command, he reached out and grabbed the snake by the tail, and it became a staff again. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." What is in your hand was God's question to Moses, and I also sensed that that was God's question to me all those years ago. I didn't have a staff. I didn't have staff either. But as I thought about it, we did have something else. We had some big-hearted, wonderfully talented people. We had a committed young leadership team, all in their 30s. We had a desire to reach out to others. And we had a building. The one thing that made life so difficult when Julie and I planted a new church in South Wales was that we didn't have our own building, a centre of operations, a place to call home. But now in Tamworth, we did have a building. And at that time, this building was only ever used on Sunday mornings for worship and for a children's club on a Thursday evening and ad hoc occasions. And in our church plant in South Wales, Sundays were absolutely manic, most certainly not a day of rest. Our fledgling congregation met in a building owned by the council. And before anything else, we needed to clear the space where we hosted church. We needed to mop the floor from beer spills from the previous evening, collect the piano from a church member's home on the estate, set up the PA system and the chairs and the banners, then take down sexual health posters and exhibits from the walls, as we didn't want to offend the Almighty, or for that matter, some dear old ladies who had started coming to the church. Then Julie and I provided a shuttle service in our car to pick up a number of elderly folk from the outlying parts of the estate. Not forgetting that when we commenced this new church, our kids were 7, 5 and 3. We got to 10:30 on a Sunday morning and all we wanted to do was to go home again, to go back to bed. Church planting isn't for wimps. Well, Moses, what is in your hand? He might have thought to himself at that moment, I've got a staff in my hand, but how is this piece of wood going to help me in Pharaoh's court? It isn't anything extraordinary. It's only a staff. But you see, here's the rub. What is in our hand may be very ordinary, but it becomes useful to the purposes of God when God anoints it. We worship a God who can take something very ordinary, like a shepherd's staff, or for that matter, in Samson's time, it was the jawbone of an ass, and in the hands of David, it was the 5 small smooth stones. In Elijah's ministry, it was a handful of flour and a little oil. In Paul's ministry, it was handkerchiefs and articles of clothing which were used to heal the sick. And let us not forget the way that Jesus used 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish in the hands of this little lad who presented his lunch to Jesus. That is one of my favourite stories. In John chapter 6, we are told that there were some 5,000 men plus women and children. When Jesus saw a great crowd coming to him, he said to one of his disciples, Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" John then quickly adds, he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Jesus' question was for Philip's benefit, not for Jesus' benefit. Jesus wanted to discover whether Philip had truly understood who he was. Where should we buy bread for these people to eat? Philip answered, by resorting to man-made solutions. 8 months' wages couldn't buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. In other words, this situation, humanly speaking, is impossible. Enter Andrew. Andrew was Simon Peter's brother, and he comes to Philip's rescue. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Andrew's reaction is almost childlike. You know what children are like. Your car breaks down and little Johnny runs with his plastic spanner or hammer to mend it, full of good intentions, but a toy spanner will never be the answer to a blown head gasket. I can imagine the awkward silence that must have followed. What a comical situation. Imagine, for instance, the reaction of his brother Peter, charismatic, larger than life, thinking to himself, this is so embarrassing. Everyone knows that he's related to me. 2 small fish, 5 small loaves, 5,000 people plus. What planet is he on? Andrew freely admitted that he didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how Jesus was going to use the lad's lunch in order to feed so many people. But it doesn't seem as if he was too bothered about that. The one thing that he did know was that Jesus was the answer to the problem. There's a great spiritual principle there, you know. What's in your hand? 5 loaves and 2 fish? Okay. Leave the rest to me, says Jesus. And Jesus blesses the lad's offering, and it multiplies. Those 5 loaves of mother's pride became sunblast. Sorry, that's incredibly corny, I know. We might think that we have very little to offer. What is in our hands, so to speak, might seem very ordinary, quite unspectacular, quite insignificant, but let us not forget that when God blesses it, it can become useful in his purposes. And God has this amazing way of multiplying the little and the insignificant, the weak, the foolish. He is a God who makes something out of nothing. I'd like to ask you a question. What's in your hand? It might be a talent or ability that you have. It might be a training that you've received to do your job. It may be certain skills that you have fine honed in industry that can be used for the Lord's work. In your hand, you might have flexible hours in your job, which provides you with an opportunity to serve his purposes. It could be that you're retired and God has blessed you with a measure of health and strength. You not only have good health, but you have time. What's in your hand? The Bible is full of stories of people frail and foolish, inadequate and lacking in any real wisdom or power, who were used in the hands of God. I love Paul's words to the church at Corinth. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. Remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes, or powerful or wealthy when God called you. Instead, God chose the things of the world this world considers foolish, in order to shame those who think they are wise. And God chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. As a result, no one can ever boast in the presence of God. The Lord often multiplies and blesses that which we bring to him, even though those things might appear ordinary to us. I love the exchange of letters between a 2nd century Greek historian named Celsus, an opponent of Christianity, and a church leader named Origen. Celsus wrote, "When most teachers go forth and teach, they cry, 'Come to me, you who are clean and worthy,' and they are followed by the highest caliber of people available. But you, a silly master, cries, 'Come to me, You who are down and beaten by life. And so he accumulates around him the ragtag and bobtail of humanity. And Origen replied, yes, they are the ragtag and bobtail of humanity. But Jesus does not leave them that way. Out of the material that you would have thrown away as useless, he fashions men, giving them back their self-respect, enabling them to stand on their feet and look God in the eyes. They were cowed, cringing, broken things, but the Son has set them free. You see, God has chosen the ragtag and bobtail of humanity. He uses ordinary people with ordinary skills. Go through the pages of the Bible and see for yourself those whom God has used. People we would think unusable or disqualified or quite useless. Someone once put it this way: Moses stuttered, John Mark was unreliable, Hosea was married to a prostitute, Amos only had experience as a fig tree pruner, Jacob was a liar, David had an affair, Solomon had too much money, Abraham was too old, Timothy had ulcers, Joseph was a nuisance, Paul was ugly, Peter was a coward, Lazarus was dead, John was self-righteous, Jesus was homeless, Naomi was a widow, Jonah was disobedient, Miriam was a gossip, Gideon and Thomas were doubters, Jeremiah was suicidal, Elijah suffered from depression, Paul was a murderer, so was Moses, not to mention David, John the Baptist dressed funny, Martha was a worrier, Samson needed a haircut, Noah had a drink problem, Moses had a short fuse. And young people, please listen. David was only a teenager. So was Mary, the mother of Jesus. So was Daniel. So were many others who were used by God. What is in your hand? Let me suggest one more thing that I've not yet mentioned, but is the most important of all. Lord, we have you. And he says, yes, you have me. I am your rock and your fortress. I am your deliverer. I am your strong tower. I am the one who promises to be with you until the end of the age. I have given you my spirit, the comforter, your guide, the one who will empower you, but only if you ask. You see, he is our greatest resource. He is the first and the last, the beginning and the end. He is the keeper of creation, the creator of all. He is the architect of the universe and the Lord of history. He always was and always is and always will be, unmoved, unchanged, undefeated, undismayed. His ways are right, his word is eternal, his will is unchanging, and his worth is inestimable. He is the King of ages and the Ancient of days. He is the leader of leaders and the ruler of the kings of the earth. And his goal is a relationship with me. He will never leave me, never forsake me. He will never mislead me, never forget me, never overlook me, and never cancel my appointment in his appointments book. When I fall, he lifts me up. When I fail, he forgives. When I am weak, he is strong. When I am lost, he is the way. When I am afraid, he is my courage. When I stumble, he steadies me. When I am hurt, he heals me. When I am hungry, he feeds me. When I face trials, he is with me. When I face persecution, he shields me. When I face problems, he comforts me. When I face loss, he provides for me. When I face death, he carries me home. When I am broken, he mends me. When I am blind, he leads me. He is God. He is faithful. I am his, and he is mine. What is in your hand? It might indeed be unspectacular and insignificant, but let us also remember that the same power that conquered the grave lives in me. Your love that rescued the earth lives in me, lives in me. Thank you for joining us today. God bless. Have a great week.